Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 255, Uncovering the Overlooked, with Dr. Hilary Apfelstadt and Alan Davis. They are the editors and driving force behind a long overdue resource, Choral Repertoire by Women Composers. For decades, conductors have talked about the need for more diverse programming, but when it comes to women composers, the academic tools just haven't been there. Until now. We talk about the research that went into cataloging over 2,000 choral works by women, why these pieces have been historically excluded, and how this book can change the way we teach, program, and think about the canon. We hear stories about these composers and the people, the authors, 56 of them, who put this book together. But more importantly, we learn some of the ideas behind the creators of the book that made it seem so imperative that we do this book, and we do this book now in the choral music landscape. So episode is not about just checking a box. It's about expanding your lens and maybe questioning who decided what belongs in it in the first place. This isn't just a book of names and pieces. It's a challenge to the way we define core literature and a call to stop letting convenience or tradition shape our programming. If you've ever thought, I'd include more women if I just knew where to start, this is where you start. Your music program or event deserves a platform that does it all, without the extra costs. With Ludus, you get seamless ticketing, built-in marketing, powerful fundraising, and volunteer management, where volunteers can sign up, schedule shifts, and track hours with ease. Need to sell merchandise and concessions in person? Ludus Retail lets you log sales by each group, track inventory, keep everything organized. Hosting music lessons or theater camps? They have a classes feature, which makes registration and student tracking effortless. And it's free for your organization. Thousands of programs already trust Ludus because they help you focus on what matters most, the performance. I don't know if you've heard about it. If you haven't heard about it, you've got to go try 3-Minute Theory. You can go to 3minutetheory.com and you can check it out now when you decide to get this comprehensive system of pre-made materials for your music theory related concepts. You just go into that account and pull out tons of ready-made material. I don't think you'll be even able to teach all of it in 1 year. It's so much stuff that you can tailor make and custom make to your needs. So go check it out. And of course, use the Choralosophy discount code when you sign up to get a 15% discount on your membership. Underwriting and crucial support for this show comes from listeners themselves who choose to subscribe on Patreon or now on Substack. Subscribers get access to the private podcast feed as well as my Google folder full of goodies and much more. Okay, everybody, I'm here with Hilary Apfelstadt and Alan Davis, and we're going to be talking about something very exciting, which is how we and what resources we might be able to use to make adjustments to the choral canon that are a little bit more gender equitable. And there is a new book out with GIA that is doing just that and is making some amazing contributions in that area. I've seen buzz about it. It's an exciting book, but also it's an exciting topic to discuss. And of course, on this show, we're all about the topics and the ideas behind these resources. And so I'm excited to have both Hilary and Alan here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Let's first get a quick little introduction from both of you. Alan, who are you and what do you do? And how'd you come to be doing that?
I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, the youngest of 5 boys, and a non-musical family. And I remember driving past this big brown building on my way to my grandpa's house almost every weekend when we hung out with him. And one day I just happened to randomly walk a block down the road and walk into this building on a Sunday morning. And there were tons of people there, and I had no idea, but it was a Methodist church. And this one lady came up to me and grabbed me and thought I was part of the children's choir that was singing in the service. So she scooted me along, and next thing I know, I'm just standing there surrounded by people singing. So that was my introduction to choir. And then through the years, I developed an interest in it. And then in middle school, I had a wonderful choir teacher. High school, I had a great mentor, Dr. Greg Vansel. And then you come to the 2 roads diverge in the woods, right? And one was going down the business path. So I did that for a little while. And then I said, I don't like some of the people that I'm working with in this field, so I'm going to go this way because everybody I work with in the choir field has always been wonderful. So I did that and went to college in the Pacific Northwest. I went to Western Washington University and studied with Tim Fitzpatrick and Dr. Leslie Golka-Cohn. And then I went to Pacific Lutheran University, one of the Lutheran colleges, studied with Richard Nance and Brian Galante. And then from there, moved to Portland, Oregon, met my wife, and then followed her to Colorado, got a master's degree in choral conducting from Cal State LA. And then I recently have completed all the coursework for the doctorate at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I have taught high school choirs. I've conducted church choirs for a number of years. Community choruses I've been assistant conductors for. But I'll tell you, my number one biggest passion is early music, and I don't think that we give that enough hype for it. And yeah, I've always been a choir literature nerd. So I think that's why I've ended up where I have along my path is always choral literature
That's awesome.
related.
That's awesome. Well, that's great. Hilary, how about you? Who are you?
I grew up in a little town in Nova Scotia, and it was amazingly musical. So I started kids choir when I was 5 and piano when I was 6, and by the time I was in junior high, I was playing violin. And when I was in high school, my dad got a job offer in Toronto. So away we went from this tiny little town to this huge big city. But I landed in an amazing high school, and they had a wonderful orchestra program, choir, all kinds of things. And it was the teacher there, John McDougall, who really inspired me to be in music education. So I went to the University of Toronto and got a choral music ed degree and thought like everybody else I would be a high school choir teacher. But my first job was teaching elementary, K6, and I loved it. So in the meantime, I had some money, luckily, a scholarship to go to the University of Illinois to do a really compressed, concentrated master's degree. Then I came back to Canada and taught for 5 years. That was the elementary stage. I went to Wisconsin, Madison, and I got to study with Robert Fountain and also do wonderful music ed things, teach in a lab school and so forth. And that was a perfect setup for the first college job I had in the States, which was at UNC Greensboro. And I was doing elementary methods, lab school, teaching conducting, working with choir. I mean, it was all the stuff I loved to do. But by the end of 10 years, it was, I just felt spread thin. So where the two roads diverged for me was going to the Ohio State University where everything was about conducting. I still look at it through the lens of a teacher because I think we're always teaching. And I became DCA there eventually, and then that was the springboard for going back to my alma mater. University of Toronto was my last full-time job. And along the way, I always had treble choirs, and I loved their repertoire, and I loved championing, I can't say that word. I loved celebrating women composers, not just of treble music, but all music. So when Alan asked me about collaborating on this, it was sort of right on my alley. Things I'm really interested in, like Alan, I'm interested in rep, finding the best, and sometimes what's really underrepresented is the best.
Yeah, that's wonderful. In fact, Hilary, we'll stay with you on that topic then, since that is kind of you segued this perfectly because that's why we're here. Is you mentioned women composers and repertoire that seeks to tell that story and speak to that perspective, or even just repertoire written by women. What was it like for you? How would you describe how that topic would have been addressed, say, if podcasts existed 30, 40 years ago or whatever? How much of this conversation would have even been had when you were starting out?
I think very little. I was thinking about the whole business of women in the field. I've been around a long time, and when I started teaching at the university level, there was no maternity leave, there was no parental leave, there was none of that stuff. And so everything was about, just doing the best you can, but it was like I had to hide that part of my personal life, and you wouldn't see programs of music by women composers. And now I wish we'd move away from that. We don't see programs by male composers because we've always done that. But I think when I was looking for reps, say 40 years ago, I didn't have the resources that we have now. I mean, even pre this book, we didn't have those kinds of resources. But now I feel as if we've moved forward and that women are making huge contributions that are more valued, more publicized, more known in a lot of ways. Mostly through my life, I was very lucky to kind of get by just doing my best. But I remember a couple of things if there's time. One was a comment from a male conductor. I was young then, speaking of 40 years ago, and I was conducting in a master class, and he came up to me after I had done a Bach cantata, and he said, Hilary, you don't conduct one bit like a woman. And he meant it as a compliment. And then the other example, and these are really the two things that stand out to me the most, a woman who was on a search committee. This was for a church job here in Columbus, Ohio, where I live now. And she came to a concert that I did at Ohio State, and at the end of it, she said, you're pretty good for a woman. And this was coming from a woman. I don't think we would hear those kinds of things anymore. And I mean, if we would, we've just gone backwards again. I feel as if my students, my most recent female students, have a much better path than I did or people of my generation. But that said, I mean, I don't have any more sad tales than those two.
Yeah. Wow. And this is something I think either of you could weigh in on if you have strong feelings about, but I do want to kind of touch on something you said earlier there, which is that because that was very insightful, and I thank you for sharing those stories. One of the things you said related to concerts that are concerts by women composers, programming that is the issue there almost like that when we do it that way, we are making a spectacle out of the women composers, or could be, or we are tokenizing them in some way, rather than just kind of the organic process of making sure that everybody is considered equally. Is that a fair way to say what you're trying to say, or how would you put that?
Yeah. Yes, for me it is. Alan may have some other thoughts, but yes, that's mine.
Yeah, Alan, thoughts about that?
Yeah, I've seen and heard it multiple different ways. I'm always the curious one that asks fellow conductors, why did you program that? Right? Or what were you thinking for putting this concert together? And I've heard from the mouths of some conductors, well, I don't program a lot of women conductors or women composers, excuse me. And so I'm going to do a whole concert to honor them. Mm-hmm. And then I've also heard it the other way where, somebody comes at it from the angle of, well, my students have not been exposed to enough women composers. So let me program some music across all of our concerts this year to balance that out for them. So I've seen both sides of that coin and heard that from fellow conductors. I think there's benefits to all of it. I mean, exposure is exposure to me, in my sense. So I think it is great to have concerts full of women composers and concerts that are kind of a balanced mix. I just think of how and why you are doing it tends to be misconstrued or a muddied concept. So, yeah, I've seen it in all those ways before. I've also seen it done in other ways. I'm going to do a concert of all Black composers, or I'm going to do a concert of all Asian composers, or I'm going to do a concert of all Canadian composers. So it just depends. And I think that is kind of a byproduct of us getting into programming solely by themes. People try to do thematic programs, and I think they feel like, well, the theme here is women, or the theme here is this, or the theme here is that. So I think it's just a byproduct of that thought. And we've all been trained a lot to program with themes in mind, and it tends to come across in all of our academic training. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it too, and I agree, and I've seen all those things. Another way to think about it, at least for me, is that it could be a theme to do a concert of all women's composers, but I would argue maybe it's not. Like if it's what's the music about? Is like what does music by a woman sound like? Of course, if we asked it that way, then that would be a silly question, because not all women write music that sounds the same, right?
Right.
And so, is the concert we're putting together, is it about women truly? Is it music that like texts about the woman, the woman's
Right.
experience? That to me, that's a theme.
Yeah,
and
that's different.
That's a beautiful theme. Yeah, it just, so I think that what we're all saying, it sounds like we're all saying the same thing, is the nuance of why you do it also, and how you approach it is what matters.
Right.
Yeah, good.
I agree.
Very much.
Cool. So, Alan, I'm going to come to you next too, because we already kind of heard a little bit about why Hilary is passionate about this project. But how did you get involved? What's the story behind your involvement in this project?
Frustration mixed with entrepreneurship, mixed with thinking of others before myself type of mentalities. First, I would like to say that it started long before this book came into being an idea from me. But I've been lucky and fortunate enough to have conductors like Dr. Leslie Golker-Cohn and Tim Fitzpatrick, Brian Galante, Don Brenniger, all of these people who program a balanced diet of repertoire, including women composers across the way. And then they are always outgoing in promoting great quality choral music. So I was in my doctorate, and I was taking a Baroque choral repertoire class with Dr. Marcus Garrett. And in the middle of it, we all had to do an hour-long presentation on a composer. And I drew Barbara Strozzi. And so my first thought was, I'm going to go to what I consider the Choral Rep Bible, and that is the Choral Repertoire book by Dr. Dennis Schrock.
Yeah.
So I go there and I open it up and I get to Barbara Strozzi and I see just a paragraph, right? 2 other composers featured on the same page, a paragraph, 7 or 8 sentences or so. So I went to Dr. Garrett and I was saying, I'm kind of frustrated because I'm looking through all of these resources I got, all these books I've bought over the years, and there's just hardly any information on Barbara Strozzi. So I went online and luckily found some more information through research. And so that was a great way for me to figure out, we just don't have access to this information in the right way that I was trying to access. Instead of relying solely on internet websites that may or may not be verified or researched well, I was going to books because those tend to be, approved along the way. So I said, I just said it out loud in his office. I said, I really wish there was a choral repertoire book that had more women in it. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, why'd you say that? I said, well, I went through the Dennis Schrock book and I counted there's 588 composers, 12 of them are women, and 8 of them were living in 2009 when the book was published. So I said, I want a book with a lot more women, like 100 women. I just threw out a number, like 100 women composers. And he goes, why don't you do it? And I was thinking the same thing at the same time, so it was kind of confirmation from somebody else, like, you should try to get this going. So I went back to my house and I kind of started writing out names of composers I wanted to see in such a book. And along the way, I got the idea of, well, I would really like this book to have legs, to be, a solid resource for our choral profession. So I kept thinking, who would be a great advocate for this? And I kept coming across Hilary Apfelstadt in my head. Hilary Apfelstadt. And I've seen her work over the years and I think it was right around the time you were retiring, Hilary. So I went to go look. I went to Dr. Garrett and I said, what do you think if I had Dr. Hilary Apfelstadt as an editor for the book? He goes, I think that'd be a good idea. And so again, just confirmation from an external source. And I said, great. So I went online to try to get a hold of her. And this is the funniest part for me. I could not find her email address, no matter what. So I ended up sending her a message on LinkedIn and just prayed that she would get it. I kept thinking, a few weeks went by the way. And so I was at the point of thinking, great, it landed in her spam box and she's never going to hear from me. So I was a little bit concerned at that point. I was like, she'd be so perfect for the book. And so thankfully, she sent me an email on like a random Thursday and said, hey, I just found this in my email. Here's my actual email address. Let's talk on the phone. So we talked on the phone, and I presented this book with a lot of passion. And I said, I want it to look like the Dennis Schrock book, and because I think that's a great format that people are used to. And I want this information in the book, and I want this. And at some point she said, okay, so she's like, this is great. I want to contact Alec Harris and let's see what he thinks about it. Alec Harris being the CEO of GIA Publications. So that was on a Monday that we talked about that. Friday we Zoom with Alec, and Alec is loving the idea. So he said, write up a proposal and send it in. So we wrote up a proposal. We made a sample of chapter on a composer using Barbara Strozzi. Here's what it would look like and all that. And that was the start of it. That was the spark of the whole thing. So I had confirmation from Dr. Garrett that it's a great idea. Hilary was thrilled about it. I'm on fire about it. Alec Harris thinks it's a brilliant idea. And so then off we went. And then the real work began, because then we had to manage a large number of, we had to figure out who we're going to have in the book. We had to figure out how we're going to write the book. We wanted it to be out by the 2025 National Conference, so we knew we had a very tight deadline, 2 years. And so what do we do from there? I originally had the idea of just having a dozen contributing authors. And then it just grew from there through necessity of what we needed and how we needed it. So
right. That's awesome. I want to get to the how to decide what's in the book part in just a minute. But before we do that, Hilary, I kind of want to get a sense of what is your side of that story. So your involvement, Alan finally gets in touch with you. And what was it that kind of got you excited, or were you a super easy sell on this?
I would say a relatively easy sell, which is a little unusual for me, but I think I must have been in a point of not being as busy, because I had worked, as a full-time interim executive director for ACDA, and that was done in 2021, and I think Alan's first contact was 2022. I was retired. I'm always looking for projects. I love writing. And I had published things, chapters of books with GIA, and I just felt as if they would be the right people. But underneath all of that was the fact that I believed in the cause. I thought, yes, we don't have anything like this. And, we have random articles. I had written a bunch of things about Canadian women composers, but you put an article in the Choral Journal and people read it at that time, or they don't, and then it just kind of disappears. But if you pull all of those things together in one volume, where people can go to it as a single source, at least a major source, I think it's much stronger. So I said, yeah, let's do it. Now, I think at the time, and Alan knows this, I don't think either one of us had any idea how much work it was going to be. And he was in grad school and had a child during this time. Oh, my goodness. So there were a few tough times, like, when we were looking for people to write, and Alan was saying initially it'd be nice to have 12, some people really only had time to do 1 or 2, because these took a lot of research. We had a few writers who did 12, like Lynn Gackel wrote 12, I wrote 11, but I was intending to do 1. Alan wrote 6, I think. Brian Stevens wrote about 20. But then we had a group of people who really said, look, I can do 1 or 2. So then we ended up, Alan, with 56 writers.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
And then, you're
56 contributing authors.
Yeah, and it's like herding cats. It really is. We had these deadlines, and we would keep pushing them out a little bit. We always set them extra early, but we were still taking things in long after I thought we would. But everybody's busy. I understand that.
Right. So I want to get both of your opinions on this too, because Dennis Schrock has come up a couple times already as kind of like the author of Choral Repertoire, and that's a text or a resource that many of us, at least in our generation, or even maybe a couple different generations, would have thought of that book as kind of the definitive resource But as Alan, you mentioned earlier, you were becoming frustrated because it was a definitive resource, but incomplete because because there were so few women in it, and if you want to involve women in your repertoire at all, then that's not going to be the right resource. And so Dennis was on the show recently, and I had a chance to talk to him about how his first book came together versus how the second book came together, which was quite a bit more diverse, and just kind of thinking about the time period that he grew up in and was educated in. It wasn't as if he decided to put a book together with hardly any women in it. It was just not talked about.
Right.
It just wasn't talked about. And so it's not as if someone said, "Hey, Dennis, you should put some women in this," and he was like, "No, I don't like women." It was just not brought up. I'm 45, and I would say that 25 years ago or so, when I was in college, undergrad, that was the world then too. We just didn't talk about it. It wasn't like we even argued about it or even had disagreements about it. It was just like not even discussed. And you're both nodding in agreement. So Hilary, thoughts about that, and just like, what does it mean to you now to see how far we've come? Are you a director new to the profession, or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com.
Well, for me as a woman, it's especially meaningful. And I've actually had more women doctoral students over the years than I have men, and it was partly because they wanted to study with a woman. I grew up in a home where my parents said, if you put your mind to it and you work hard, you can succeed, you can do this. And so I always thought, well, of course, why should I be held back? Why should anybody be held back because of gender? So you just work hard and you do the work. Well, there's all this wonderful music out there. Let's make sure people hear it. And it is, going back to what you said earlier, it's not necessary that women write with a particular voice. Could I tell the difference in listening to one work? If I didn't listen to the text, would I know? Or even if I did hear the text, I don't think I would know, unless it was somebody that, whose language is so distinctive. Yes, I would recognize Gwyneth Walker's writing or something like that. But it's just odd to me. But if you look at so many aspects of life, it wasn't just in music that we were marginalized. It was in other fields as well. So I'm glad, I'm grateful. I think it needs to become the norm. What Alan said about that kind of representative programming, that you just pick the music by the music and you have a balance of, you've got some Black composers and you've got women and you've got men and you've got, different voices, and also from different time periods. It's really interesting. I learned so much about some of the women and the struggles they went through if they were writing, say, in the early 1900s or something like that. It was an education for me. It really was.
Yeah. Anything you want to add about that, Alan?
Yeah. I even after writing our book, I still think that Dennis Schrock's book is absolutely incredible. I do think it is a reflection of what we were doing in academia in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, and what we were programming on stage, right? We were doing a lot of male composers, and that's just a reflection of that. Now, granted, I will say this. No book ever produced will be perfect.
Right.
None. Right. So, and the All West books, A History of Choral Repertoire,
those are
unbelievable
wonderful
books. And then you got Dennis Schrock with all of his books, including Performance Practice. I just think this book right now in 2025 is reflective, I think, of what's happened in the last 20 years. Since you and I, Chris, were in undergrad, I'm only 5 years younger than you. So, that being the case, I think it's timely because, I was standing at the National ACDA conference in Dallas a few months back, and I was looking at all the featured composers that were at the conference. Rosephine Powell had a piece premiered, name another composer, all of these things going on. And just the large amount of women who are being featured was night and day different from the very first conference I attended, which was in 2007.
Yeah.
The national, I think, in Miami or whatnot. So I think it's a reflection, and I think that it's us adding to what we've known in the past, adding to Bach and Mozart and all these other guys in the performance practice. And that's the thing that I'm proud about the most about the book, is that all of our contributing authors and our community of composers, we're just adding. We're not saying that, don't program Bach, don't program Mozart, don't do Handel. We're just saying, like, look who's here now and look at the incredible work they're doing. And why can't we do it all? We can. I don't think I'll ever see a composer go, oh man, that concert, or a conductor go, that concert was great, except for they had one more guy than they did women, and stuff like that. So, but yeah, so I think the Der Schrock books are great, and I'm very glad that information's out there and readily accessible in book forms, because, tomorrow an E-bomb could go off and the internet could be gone. Then what are we going to do? So
yeah. And, and here's a thought, and I want you, if either of you have a reaction to this, feel free to shoot it back, because that's what we do here. So this is a piggyback on something you said, Alan, about how no book's going to be perfect. It's always going to leave out something. Because the obvious would be that it would be an infinite book, and that's not, there's no reason to have that, right? So, but it also reminds me of another thought, which is that the road towards progress in any capacity is going to be bumpy, and it's going to be messy.
Yes.
And so to kind of tie it back to something that we had that Hilary said at the very beginning, which is she would prefer to not see a concert where it's like, this is just women composers, because it's like, well, but I want them to be included with other programs too. Like we want to see all of this, but it's almost like you could imagine that in order for us to get from where we were when Dennis wrote his book to where we want to get, we would need to create a book like this, because if the next generation of conductors and teachers are to create a program that truly does present a buffet of what is available out there, their resources have to reflect that, or else we're just going to keep perpetuating the same problem. So I think it sounds to me like even though if we could snap our fingers and go back in time and just have all these women composers just were included the whole time, then that's great. But we can't do that. We don't have a time machine, so we have to start now and do that. Thoughts about that?
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. I think it's going to become the norm the more people see that modeled. Most of us model our programming, I think, after what we grew up with. And I see a lot of young high school teachers, for example, out programming things they did in college. Is the stuff too hard for their kids? Yes, it is. So there's a big learning curve there. But if it becomes the norm that the programs, maybe they're around a theme, maybe it's justice or whatever it is, but it has a variety of musical styles and composers, then that becomes the new norm. As opposed to, the chronological, we're going to do something obligatory from the Renaissance, that was the model I grew up with. And when I first started teaching university, that was kind of what we did. You had this obligatory 5 centuries of choral music, and then we got into, the 6th century. And but you often do what you see modeled. And so the more we make it the norm, the more likely it's going to become the norm.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course,
that's exactly.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, that's exactly my thoughts about why this book is so important and so necessary right now. And the other thing I think is important about this book is it's not heavily Eurocentric, where our core of the choral history comes from, right? The churches in England and Germany and Austria and Italy and all of those places. Our book actually has a really good amount of South American composers from all over South America and Mexico and over in Thailand and Japan and China and all of these wonderful places. So I think that's another thing I think this book is trying to advocate for, is being more worldly in what we're doing and open to it. Granted, the one caveat to that is that there are composers around the world who would love to have their music performed more, but due to some of their country's issues, they can't get their music out. Mm-hmm. Or because it's self-published and they don't have the means to get it advertised everywhere. So we did a lot of great work, I think, for South American choral composers that I'm quite proud about. Yeah, but again, going back to everything that we've said here today is it's timely. And yes, I 100% agree with you, Chris. I think that this book, being only about women composers and female identifying composers, is a great way to say, okay, we've had all these other books come out and we've had these hundreds of years of choral scholarship happening, and we just need a full tome done now in order to kickstart us into the future for better balance. And I think that's what this does. So
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think a lot about how on the Eurocentric point, how our history of our art form is very Eurocentric, but not the present. The present is not.
No.
Choir is everywhere.
No.
And what we talk, how we talk about it should reflect that. I've made a big effort on this show to try to find, obviously for podcasting, people do kind of need to speak English to listen to my show, and I that's the only language I can speak. But there are English speakers all over the place, and so finding guests from different countries who can come on to my show and tell me what choir is like for them has been a fascinating aspect. Like, how does choir fit into your culture? Because it's different than how it fits into my culture. That kind of thing has been a really interesting thing that I've been able to learn. Okay, so let's move next into the stories of some things that are in the book. If there's anything you guys want to shout out, you mentioned there's 56 authors. We can't talk about all 56, but if you want to tell us some of those stories of how you made decisions of what got to be in the book, if either of you can tackle this.
Do you mean starting with composers we chose, or how we got the writers?
Either, whatever jumps to your mind. We can talk about all of them.
Hey, Alan, jump in. Tell them about how we thought who belonged in the composer list.
Yes, so the composers list. So I sat down and I started writing out names of composers I knew, and eventually I found out that I could only name about 23 or 25 women composers, and I thought, well, that's disappointing. So I went to Hilary and said, again, the goal is at least 100, because that's just the number that I started with when I wanted to put this together. And we said, well, why don't we ask, and this is my favorite part about the community of this book, is why don't we ask our fellow conductors across social media platforms? Uh-huh. So we put out surveys, and they started to send in names, and we ended up with almost 400 names, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. And in our book, as it's published right now, is 225 composers. So we started to collect all these names, and then we'd already contacted about 20 some odd contributing authors. And so they were giving us names as well. And some of these contributing authors were people who had commissioned a lot of women composers over the years. Unfortunately, some of those contributing authors at the beginning of the project had to bow out because they had health concerns or other family things going on, and they just could no longer commit the time to the project. Yeah. But their contributions at the beginning, helping us get this list of composers, was pretty incredible. So we got the list, and then I spent the entire summer of 2022 kind of vetting a lot of these composers. Me and 3 of my fellow contributing authors just went through and said, okay, what music have they written? Is it still accessible? Could we still get to publishers of it? Or Are they self-publishing? Things like that. So we went through, we listened a lot, we researched a lot, we kind of whittled things down. Some composers only wrote that were suggested, only wrote 1 or 2 or 3 pieces, and that was in like a really short time span. Say they did that in like 2 years. They wrote 3 or 4 choral pieces, and then they just stopped. So that kind of, in our mind, kind of disqualified them from the book a little bit because that was 20 years ago. They're no longer active. And also, some of the composers we wanted to include in the book wrote back to us and said, no thanks. Don't want to be in the book.
Really?
Which was an that was an interesting thing that happened as well.
That's fascinating.
So there's that that happened along the way. And then, there were composers that we were looking at, and we were like, well, we'd love to include them in the book, but they just started composing a year or 2 ago. And yes, they are producing a voracious amount of choral music right now and everything, but their career hasn't stabilized yet, right? So we're saving those names for a possible second edition down the road and all those things. But we ended up eventually with 225. And so that was a very proud moment.
I was just thinking about, remember how we asked 6 people, including Chet Alwys and some others, to look at our list and see if they thought we were missing or we had people we shouldn't have. And that was really helpful because these were not people who were going to write for the book, but they had huge rep knowledge. And they really, for me, that was a pivotal moment to see what they sent back to us.
Yeah. And again, I'm proud of that moment because it's that external feedback of others who are not involved in the project, looking at the list and going, this is a solid list of composers, And that was an idea that came from Hilary initially. And I remember we were talking about some of the composers we were or were not going to include. And then Hilary said, hey, when this list is done, why don't we send it out to some external people? And I said, that's brilliant. Let's do it. So again, that full-roundedness of collaboration for the book. There were some composers who were left off the book who had contacted me or had contacted Hilary and said, hey, why was I not included in the book? And, the thing is, again, we can't include absolutely everybody at the time. The book was so big that we were getting feedback of, we can't add more pages.
Right.
Yeah. Sure.
Or we can't bind the book together. It's so big. It's over 800 pages as is.
Right.
So
we did put a
things like that. We did. We do have a disclaimer in the book.
And the book is already out of date too. That's another thing. You can't ever keep up. But
sure.
The publishing world is.
And that goes back to the lack of perfection as a possibility in the first place.
Right.
And I'm always of the mind that we probably shouldn't try to do impossible things. It'll drive us crazy. And so, I think the way you've set it up there as yes, we can't include everything, but there are certain criteria that we look for. And, and I think that's actually remarkably similar to how Dennis explained his, was because he was trying to make sure that the composer wasn't just a fly by night, wrote 2 songs. Yeah. They could be fantastic 2 songs. They may have been awesome, but then that person moved on and became an insurance broker or whatever. And so we don't need to put that person in the book, that kind of thing. And then and making a significant impact in our art form as being one of those other criteria, which to me helps make, even though your book, you could say, Hilary, that the book's already out of date, but it does help it become a little bit more timeless. Because
absolutely,
people will still be doing that music, years later.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. Yep. And that's what we hope, is that the music, all of the music, is of a high quality that people will want to keep coming back. And even if you don't find specific pieces that we listed, because we have about 10 to 12 pieces for each composer who's there, and publishing information and so forth, even if they don't come back to those pieces, there may be from the current composers some new things, and we've introduced that person to them as a potential composer. So really, a lot of it is about a springboard to further research for people.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's another reason why talking about what's included in the book is when you're in the middle of writing a dissertation, you're neck deep in citations. You have to prove everything, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things I'm proud about for the book is that we do have lists of citations for every composer that we wrote about. And I think that that's a great tool for anybody who wants to continue researching these composers, or to find a composer who has not had a dissertation written on them yet, who has enough music that you can do something like that on, that you can go and do that, or a master's thesis. Yeah. So that's something I'm very, very proud about. But the one thing I would like to include is how we came across 56 contributing authors, including Hilary and I. And that is, initially, again, I wanted to have about 12. So I found 12 folks. And initially, I think, Hilary, you were just planning on writing on one composer and then editing the book. And I was planning on writing on a lot more composers than just the 6 I did. But I ended up managing 55 other contributing authors and schedules and dissertations. And my 2-year-old son was born, and all that stuff. So anyway, the first person I contacted is Philip Swan. And Philip Swan is absolutely a pillar in our choral community when it comes to celebrating, advocating for, programming, and commissioning women composers. And so I knew that ever since you and I, Chris, were young people in this field. I've heard of Philip Glass.
Also Philip Glass.
Philip Swan. Yeah. Philip Swan. And so I reached out to him, and he gave us a large number of names and was a great contributor. Eventually, he had to bow out of the whole project. But he's very proud of the book, and I remember seeing him at the national conference running up to me going, yes, 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 So that, again, is that external feedback that is just beautiful to get. So we initially had 12 or so, and then we realized nobody has enough time to write on 30 composers by themselves. The list of composers was getting longer, so we needed to add more contributing authors. So Hilary and I put our heads together, started to come up with more names, for instance, John Hughes wrote on Dale Trombore, and John Hughes has programmed a lot of Dale Trombore in his career, and he's also commissioned her. He's worked with her at his Green Lake Music Festival and everything. So he had a very intimate knowledge of her music, and so a wonderful contributor he was. And so we go on, and we have all of these composers. Brett Scott wrote on Violet Archer. If you've never heard of Violet Archer, a wonderful Canadian composer, she's got some amazing music. From her 3 Canadian folk songs to her Sing the Muse, which is a multi-movement, 6-movement piece. And she tends to write for not just SATB, but SSAATTBB settings. So if you're looking for those extended voicings, larger works, textures, then Violet Archer's got a great number of pieces for that. Philip Brunel was another early contributing author that we contacted, and he has a long-standing career of programming and advocating for women composers. Brian Stevens. So we just went down this line and started to ask people, and they came on. And the great thing is, some of them have already done significant research on these composers. Or commission these composers, so they understood the inner workings of these composers. So that was my favorite part of the whole process, was finding the right author to write on this composer, like Allegra Martin. Dr. Allegra Martin over in the Boston, Massachusetts area wrote on Margaret Bonds. And she had already written an entire dissertation on Margaret Bonds. So imagine having that authority coming into the book and writing the 3 pages or so that we have on Margaret Bonds. I mean, it's just, so you get to the book and the quality of it and go, yeah, this is substantial. All these experts are talking about all these things. And so I think that provides more weight to the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So how would you describe, and maybe Hilary, you can take this one. How would you describe the book to somebody that's going to go, of course, hear this conversation? They're going to get super excited about it, and they're going to buy a whole classroom set for their choral lit class that they teach at their university, and they're going to open it up. And what are they going to see? How is the book put together? How is it stories about the person? Is it biographical? Are there rep lists? Those types of things. What are they going to see?
Yes, all of the above. They're going to see
All the above.
short chapters, if we can, that are all done alphabetically. Obviously, we start with A, so the composers are listed alphabetically. So you may be going from a Canadian composer to one who was in Scotland but there's an index where you can find the composers by country. And that's really helpful. If, for example, you were doing a study of music from the British Isles, you could go and find some female composers from that area. For each composer, there's a biographical section which includes not only information about their life, but also about their musical style. And for the contemporary composers, lots of whom were interviewed by their writers, it's really fascinating to see what they say about their own style. And then sometimes the writer will also couple that with some critics' reviews or something like that. And then following that biographical / musical information essay, which is all done in narrative, then there is a chart, if you will, of up to 10 to 12 pieces. It gives you the voicing for the piece, it gives you the instrumentation, it tells you where it's published and its duration. So if you're looking for a long work versus a short work, you know right away what that is. And then there's a reference list. So that will often include things like the composer's website, if they're current, dissertations that have been written about them, scholarly articles. And somebody was saying to me the other day, well, I can't go into the book, and just click on the link. But how easy it is just to take that website, go to your browser, put it in, and you come up with amazing things, because the contemporary ones especially many of them have wonderful websites with recordings and all sorts of things. For us, it's a stepping stone to research. And I think the stories about these people, even if that's all you do is read their life stories, it's really fascinating. I mentioned before what I had learned. There was a French composer, Mélanie Bonis, whom I didn't know anything about. She went by Mel, M-E-L, to mask her gender. She married somebody who already had 5 children. She raised 5 stepchildren. She had 3 of her own. Then she had a 4th out of wedlock. She had 9 children and wrote 300 pieces of music. How did she do that? It's just fascinating. And some of the things that they had to go through. She was a classmate of Debussy. Her parents didn't want her to be educated, and she got to go to the Paris Conservatoire because they had a friend of the family who said she needs to study music. I didn't know all those kinds of things. And I think choirs are interested when you're doing a piece of music by that person. If you know some of that information, it's right there. You're not scrambling looking for 10 different sources. Like Alan said, it's, we've tried to put it together in one place.
Yep.
That's wonderful. And I think that stories help sell things. And the stories, you can't even sell a bottle of whiskey anymore without printing some story about the history of the distillery or whatever on the back of the bottle. It's probably made up. It's not even real. But they sell it with stories. And I think, Hilary, your point about choirs are interested in this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Audiences are too. Audiences would
Absolutely.
like to hear some interesting story about how this piece of music that they're about to hear came to be. And oftentimes we just blast through the concert and don't talk about stuff. So this could be a resource for that as well.
Oh, yeah. And how many ways can you involve the students, whether they're reading the text or they're telling a little bit? People don't read written program notes anymore, but to incorporate that as part of the concert or have art from that time period or something like that, it becomes a much broader experience for people. I just think it's more interesting. It's not a park and bark sort of situation anymore. Yeah.
For sure. For sure. Well, this just Yeah, this sounds really, really valuable, and I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation. And we're going to kind of wrap this up so that you guys can get along with your or get about with your days. But before we do, and maybe Alan, let's throw it back to you for some of the business side of this. How do we find the book, and what, if anything, do you want people to know about? How to find it, how they should use it, that kind of stuff on the way out.
Yeah, so we could find the book in print through the GIA website. And then if you want to order it through Amazon, you could get it either in print or through a Kindle version, which just came out a month ago.
Yes.
And it is readily, order it, and you should get it in a timely manner.
And it looks like this.
Yeah. Beautiful purple cover with one of the featured composers of the book has their piece highlighted on the cover. So if you could figure that out and email me at alantroydavis@gmail.com, I will possibly send you $5. Possibly. That's the disclaimer. So, but that was,
it's like an Easter egg.
It was a wonderful, wonderful cover created by Brian Gibson, who is the music education editor at GIA and has been just a wonderful person to work with. If you're going to use this book, I would say use it first for your own curiosities, because I think that'll liven the book for you. Go in there with a question. Who is a composer from name this place that I've never been, that I've never heard of? Let's go find something. Let's discover something new. And then from there, go back to what you know. And hopefully this will be a book that you could use every summer as you begin programming your music and for the school year and everything. So yes, please use it with curiosity first, and then attack it from the side of I have to find something. And I think that it'll be a wonderful process.
Great. Hilary, any last words to leave people with?
I think that people will find a wealth of information there that perhaps they had no idea existed. To me, it's like a treasure trove. And I would have said that if I'd had nothing to do with it, just simply because there is so much in one place. And I've always loved scholarship, and, I'm a bit of a nerd in that way. And I love things like this that just give you so much in one volume. Somebody told me that the postage cost almost as much as the book. And I thought, hey, 800 and some pages, it's worth every cent.
Yep.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, thank you both for joining me, and hopefully this will spread the word and get people interested in a broader base for their canon, if anything else. But more importantly, I think most people are on board with that, but lacking the resources to do it. So this should be an exciting way to do that.
Yep. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code, and of course now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.